All right, Alex. Um, First time I messaged you, I remember, was about a year ago, and you said you'll come on the pod, and then you ghosted me. But you had a very good excuse because you were just in the middle of selling your startup for reportedly $300 million. So, first of all, congratulations. I forgive you because that's a good excuse, and thanks for making the time this time.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you very much, Baptiste. It was. I'm not sure I ghosted you. I think I said originally, "Hey, look, this will be much more interesting in a few months' time
Something
because
like
there's
that, yeah.
something I can talk about." So that's what I was waiting for to complete. But really happy to be here, and thank you for having me on.
I have a lot of questions. You've had a pretty interesting career and obviously some very good business success. So there's a lot of things I want to talk to you about, but I want to start somewhat at the beginning. So according to your LinkedIn, your first job was you were a turnaround CEO slash restructuring officer, which I think is interesting. First of all, I've heard of those jobs before. I don't personally know anyone who's done that. It sounds interesting, but especially it sounds, my first job was, let's not even go into that, but it was very very different, right? For a lot of people, their first job is, you work at a bar, or it's
Yeah.
something a bit more simpler. So I'm curious, first of all, how did you even get into that early in your career, and then second of all, so how did that impact the rest of your career, because it
Yeah.
sounds like
Look,
it
to
could
be
be
clear,
quite
I did
impactful.
have some jobs before that. So yeah. Look, after having some normal jobs working in bars and supermarkets, which is where I started out as a kid. While I was studying at university, I was studying languages, and I got my first, I guess, experience in the turnaround world as a translator, working for an American investor, translating between him and some workers' unions at a company that they were trying to acquire in France. And that I was lucky. It was a friend who worked for that group originally that introduced me. But the translation work turned into me kind of taking over some of those negotiations because you're in quite a powerful position as a translator. And off the back of that, I think they were quite impressed, and so they offered me a job after university. I had another job offer from a consulting firm from Accenture actually at the time, but I decided to go down this slightly, I guess, probably riskier and less trodden path because I thought there was an opportunity to learn more and take on more responsibility more quickly. So yeah, I went into the world of turnaround, which is buying distressed companies, having a very intense period where you're trying to restructure them, put them on a solid base so that you can hire a new management team, get new customers in place, renegotiate all the supplier contracts, and hopefully, obviously, grow that business and give it a long, profitable life under the group. And yeah, so it was really chance that led to me joining the group. And yeah, it was a very unique experience. I think it taught me a lot. It's kind of the opposite of certainly what venture-backed startup world has been for the past decade, in that you're really focused on like optimizing for cash flow
Hmm.
and so I'd say it was a big adjustment going from that turnaround space into founding my first company. It's kind of like almost the opposite mindset where you're raising a lot of venture dollars and trying to deploy that money. So yeah, it was a good school for the start of my career, and it certainly led me to making some to getting a lot of experience under my belt at quite a young age, and I think set me up well for starting my own sort of business and entrepreneurial journey.
How many turnarounds were you involved with? I think it was quite a few.
Dozens, yeah. I mean, and
Wow.
certainly in terms of deals, there were dozens that I was involved in. Whether they were deals that didn't end up closing, as in we couldn't complete the transaction, or there are deals that we did close and then we turned around. I was a turnaround CEO on three companies during that time, where I was actually running the sort of turnaround post deal closing. But yeah, I was involved in dozens more, particularly on the sort of M&A side and trying to negotiate some of the transactions up front. And then sort of was parachuted in on a consulting basis into various other companies in that group during the 4 or so years that I was with them.
Is that a very challenging job? Because it sounds like, I mean, on one side, it can be a big opportunity. So obviously something went wrong with the company, you can, turn it around, make it a success. But it also, I mean, there's a reason why something went wrong, right? So maybe it's like a really, really, maybe the company's in a really difficult position. Maybe the market has changed. I don't know.
Yeah, look, it's there's not a perfect hit rate, right? You do expect, similar to sort of, I guess, investing in startups, you do expect a certain number of companies to be beyond your ability to turn around.
Mm,
But you're investing very little up front. And in our case, we were really buying these companies for a dollar, or in some cases, we had a negative purchase price, right? So we would have the company and we'd get it with a lot of money in the bank account. So these were very heavily distressed businesses with lots of debt. And so your real, what have you risked there? Well, you've risked the time that you're putting in to turn around the deal initially, right? Because you're not
mm-hmm.
injecting tons of capital until it's, on a solid basis and it's cash flow positive. So, from an IRR perspective, it's an amazing business, right? You have almost infinite returns on your capital, right? It actually makes venture look like a very bad business. So yeah, it's there are definitely you do encounter failures in that space, and some sectors are in a significant decline when you buy the company, and really it's about restructuring the business to be much smaller and hoping that there's still enough of a market for you to go after with the business at the end of that restructuring process. But you don't win every time. We certainly had a couple that failed while I was there, but luckily the vast majority we actually had succeed. And the returns when they do succeed, given you haven't invested very much capital or any capital up front, in order to acquire them, are very significant. So as a whole, as a portfolio strategy, it can really work from a private equity perspective.
Fascinating. Okay. Okay. And then so from there, you went on to start Velocity Black, or I think it was first called Velocity, right? And
It was.
yeah.
Mhm.
So maybe for those who are listening, can you just explain what Velocity Black is today, I guess?
Yeah, so today, Velocity Black is a AI concierge for high net worth individuals. So, the closest parallel in terms of existing products would be something like Quintessentially or American Express have a Centurion card where they offer this kind of concierge service to high net worth. So, helping people with dinner reservations, travel bookings, experience bookings like music festivals, sporting events, luxury goods purchases, and historically, that's all been done by people on phones in a very analog way, which was not a great customer experience. And our approach was, can we apply technology to this space and create an app, a technology product, rather than having a phone number that people are calling, where we automate a lot of these processes. We do a lot of integrations with third parties, and ultimately layer on top AI and natural language processing to create a much better customer experience, but also a much more efficient business model than the traditional analog concierge companies. So that's the product today. It has a direct private client offering under the Velocity Black brand. So you sign up, you pay a membership fee, get access to this app with 24/7, 365, guaranteed 1 minute response, which is part human, part artificial intelligence. And it's a very personalized product. They onboard a lot of information about you, and then they help you get access to all sorts of amazing things and basically run your lifestyle for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that happens under the Velocity Black brand. And then there's a Velocity for Enterprise brand where we white label that technology and service for corporates. So banks, credit card companies, car companies. We actually, Rolls-Royce is one of the biggest customers that we had. We looked after all Rolls-Royce owners globally. They have a product called Rolls-Royce Whispers, which was powered, in fact, still is powered by Velocity Black to this day. So that enterprise part of the business, which wasn't under our brand, is a very big part of the business today as well. But it didn't start there. You're right. We started out, it was called Velocity, and it was a very different product. So after my time at AIC, I decided to leave, and I knew I wanted to start my own thing, but I actually didn't know what I wanted to start when I told AIC that I was leaving. And I went up into the mountains for a few weeks by myself and thought about a lot of different ideas. And at the time, like mobile payments, this is sort of 2014, mobile payments was really like an interesting and growing category, attracting a lot of venture investment. And I used to go out and eat a lot, particularly in my old job where I was traveling all around the world, never in, one place for, more than a few days. And one thing that always frustrated me was waiting for the bill in restaurants. And so our first product of Velocity was an app where you could book the world's best restaurants. We're focused on high-end restaurants. And then we integrate with a point of sale system. So you can view the bill on your phone, split it with your friends and pay and get up and leave rather than having to wait for the waiter to bring it and go through that whole embarrassing rigmarole of settling the bill with cards and splitting it with all your friends. So that was our initial product. And that was under Velocity. And, it was quite popular. We raised a lot of venture capital, raised, over $40 million in the end, really most of it focused on that initial product. And it was popular with customers. We had a lot of customers. It was growing very quickly. But it was a terrible business, really terrible unit economics. It cost a lot of money to acquire a customer. We had very high churn in customers because we couldn't control the experience in the restaurant. And if, a waiter looked at someone in a strange way when they asked if they could pay with this app, it kind of ruins the experience for the customer and they're unlikely to use it again. So it was something which, from an idea perspective, captured the imagination of a lot of investors and clients. But in the end, sometimes those ideas don't make good businesses. So we pivoted after having raised most of the money we ever raised and focused on this. At the time, we were calling it Velocity Premium, this like premium tier product that we were testing, which ended up, evolving into Velocity Black.
Velocity Black is it's a pretty badass name. I think you came up with a good name in the end.
Thanks.
Um,
I thank my co-founders here for that. He came up with the name.
nice. So I definitely want to come to a growth topic because obviously you were one of the fastest growing companies in Europe in several of the years throughout your growth journey. Um, but maybe before that, so I remember you said at some point that the beginnings were extremely hard, right? There was like basically 24/7 working, building the business. What does that really mean? So how what did that look like? All right, before we continue, I want to take a second to talk about our sponsor. I've always been saying that one of the best ways to learn about business is by working closely with a smart and successful entrepreneur, and this might be your opportunity. Our sponsor is a company called Judge Me. Judge Me is a Shopify product review plugin, and they're the number one plugin on Shopify. They're literally, if you look at the Shopify App Store, they're in the first spot. They're bootstrapped, and they managed to outcompete other companies that raised hundreds of millions of dollars by just being smarter and building a better product. They were started by PJ, who was also a guest on the Founders Lounge, episode 54, so I recommend you to check it out. They recently moved their headquarters to London, and they're looking for smart people to join them. They're looking for product managers, engineers, and they're looking to fill other roles as well. So check out careers.judge.me and see if you find any role that you like and apply. So that's careers.judge.me. Now, enjoy the rest of the episode.
In terms of the actual hours, are you asking?
Um, I guess so. Two things. One, what did it take in the beginning to actually get it off the ground? And I think that's a question that's in the minds of many people who are either just starting off or they're trying to figure out what does it really take to actually succeed, right?
So, I mean, my first, general comment on this, and I don't, general advice for founders, I tend to say isn't that useful, but I think this piece of advice I'd rate very highly. It's certainly a piece of advice I took to heart when I was starting Velocity and now starting my second business, Sequel. Speak to as many potential customers as you can right at the start of the journey, right? And you may have an idea about products and your assumptions around that may be strong, particularly if it's a product for you. And we really built Velocity and Velocity Black initially for myself and Zia, my co-founder. But you don't really know anything until you're live, and before you've actually built something, speaking to as many customers as possible in detail about what you're planning to launch, getting feedback on the idea, showing them designs, trying to test the problem that you're solving and whether it's a real problem for those customers is a really good use of your time, right? Speaking to as many customers as possible. Obviously, hiring becomes a thing a bit later on, but speaking to as many customers as possible and building at the same time as you're doing that, the two areas where you're really investing all of your time in that very initial sort of embryonic stage of a startup. And, I've been through that with my second company as well. So it's something that I'd replicate again. And it's certainly a very good, I think, advice generally for founders to focus their time and energy on product and building, and then speaking to customers and testing some of the things they're building to make sure they're on the right path, or at least they're maximizing the chances they're on the right path to have a successful launch of their product.
There's a book I've recommended often to many founders. It's called The Mom Test by, I
Yeah.
think it's Rob Fitzpatrick. It's a very short book. It's, I think, less than 100 pages, and it just describes so well how to talk to customers, especially in such a way that you don't learn the wrong things, right? Because it's very easy to come to wrong conclusions when you talk to potential
Yeah, it's
customers.
very easy to seed your conclusions in the questions that you're asking.
Mm.
So funny you mentioned that book. We actually gave it to one of my team at SQL, who is speaking to our clients, are
Uh,
professional athletes, and he's speaking to a lot of athletes and getting feedback about our product. And we actually gave him that book yesterday to help him sort of get feedback in an unbiased way, hopefully, without
yes.
coloring it too much with his own thoughts. So yeah, it's a great book. Definitely recommend that.
Right. So, okay, one of the fastest growing companies in the UK, one of the fastest growing in Europe. What were what were some of the most memorable moments in that journey? And it could be the highlights or the lowlights, because I think there's both that comes with that, right? So obviously, with so much growth, there are a lot of very, very difficult moments, and then also a lot of from my experience, it's often the highlights get kind of blurred by all the difficult things that you have, right? So sometimes it's hard to actually appreciate all the things that you should celebrate. But yeah, I'm curious, what were some of the most memorable moments, some of the things that stand out in that journey?
Definitely first paying customer, right? I think
Mm,
any founder kind of remembers that point, right?
mm,
And particularly with the Velocity Black product, which had a quite high price point, several £1,000s for someone to buy a membership. Um, the day where we first had that first paying customer, I still remember where I was when it happened, and that's certainly a memory that I'll cherish. I think those early days when it was like three or four of us in a very, well, actually in our basement apartment, initially building the first version of the product, are also very positive memories for me. I don't necessarily think that the fundraise, when you hit fundraise milestones, for me, those aren't like, I don't really see them as highlights, to be honest. Right? You kind of, I think some of the times we're most stressed actually is when we just closed a fundraise and we realized,
mm,
in some ways you look at that as debt, even if it isn't debt, because it's like, well, I'm
mm,
going to have to give all these people a return at some point, right? And it
mm,
really puts the pressure on, right? So I wouldn't say those were highlights. But yeah, like customer milestones and getting feedback from customers and seeing, we used to get lots of feedback, obviously, from our customers at Velocity Black, the kind of experiences we were creating for our clients, right? People getting married off the back of experiences that we were creating, people having children, all sorts of things. So that was also, certainly very rewarding as
mm,
a founder. And then the tougher things, we were first time founders, and we made mistakes. Or Zia's not here to defend himself, so I'll say I made some mistakes certainly, and I think hiring and culture was something that initially we didn't invest enough in, and we made some mistakes, or we weren't purposeful in how we did it initially. And halfway through, we kind of realized, okay, we need to really make a big change here in terms of how we define the culture and how we do the hiring process, and how we onboard people. And when we made that change, it had a dramatically positive impact on the business. But certainly, one of the things, low lights, is certainly thinking about the early years. How we hired and how we set the culture is something that I wish I could go back and kind of do those early years again, because we may have got to the end goal a lot quicker, and maybe with a bit less capital. So yeah, that may be a low light. And there were several near death situations throughout the years,
uh.
and yeah, like
When you
I
say near
certainly,
death, you mean the death of the company, not of a person.
sure,
Yeah. Okay.
at least in the Velocity Black journey, yeah, near death of the company. And those, I think those situations that, given that we got through them all, I'd certainly say that there was some rewarding aspect of coming out the other side of a crisis, right, and having
Mm,
the company having survived. Um, but some of those situations were definitely avoidable, in hindsight. And so,
Mm.
yeah, I'd certainly say some of these near death experiences were traumatic, and probably not things you want to look back on. Yeah, a lot of people think, I actually, in my thank you sort of post and communication after we sold the company, I actually, at the end of it, and some people could see this as being bitter, but it wasn't. I genuinely meant it. I thanked, all the people who doubted us, all the haters, right? All the people who said it wasn't going to work, all the investors that said no to us and told us we were idiots. I genuinely thank those people because for me, that's fuel. And I'm not sure I would have got through the journey without wanting to prove all those people wrong. And maybe that's like a negative thing, but for me, that kind of fuel really helped me along the journey get through those tough points. So while some people may see those things as lowlights, for me, they were actually really highlights because they put more fuel on the fire and made me more determined to actually prove everyone wrong and get a really good outcome for everyone.
So funny. I was just thinking about that yesterday because I see that same thing in myself as well. Sometimes there are just some people I really want to prove them wrong, and I really want to show them that I can do something and I can accomplish something. I'm like, I wonder if that's healthy, but I think it works.
Mhm.
That's part of what adds to your fuel, right? Interesting.
Definitely.
Also, the first two things that you mentioned, they're so incredibly relatable. What you said about getting the first customer. I remember my first real company, real startup, was 5, 6, maybe 6, 7 years ago, and it was also well. We are basically selling language courses or language experiences, right? So people would travel abroad to learn a language abroad. So it was also a reasonably high priced purchase. And I remember I was on the phone with our first potential customer, and we just kind of had a website. We really didn't know yet what we were doing, but I was on the phone with this customer. I remember where I was. I remember what the time of the day was. I think I pretty much remember how I was dressed. I was there on a call with his mother, who was going to send her child to study with us, and I was trying to do my sales pitch, not really even knowing how to properly sell that yet. And then in the end, the booking came in the evening, that same day in the evening. And I remember where I was. I was just talking to my friend. We had like a Skype call or something. And yeah, probably one of the most memorable moments of my life in a way, right? That first sale that you make.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Yeah, I can remember what I was wearing as well. I can remember. I don't know how long ago it is now, maybe 7 years ago, but for the first Velocity Black membership sale. But yeah, I remember exactly where I was, the room, what I was wearing. So yeah, um, yeah, definitely that's a memory that I think every founder has, their first paying customer.
mm, um, one question that just occurred to me. So, what were you were offering all sorts of experiences and services to your clients, or still are, right? Velocity is offering that. Just to give an idea, what are some of the examples, or maybe some of the more premium examples, or some of the more crazy examples that you can give?
Yeah, so look, the examples I'm going to give are, the least scalable aspect of the business, right? So
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, this is not the everyday stuff we were doing. The everyday stuff we were doing is really travel, plugging into
Hmm.
all sorts of online reservation systems for hotels and flights and private aviation and yacht charter and villa rental. But some of the more unique experiences that we did over the years, a private meeting with the Pope was one. Did that for quite a few members actually. So we
Oh
were able to
wow.
arrange that, and that those were people were really we actually sent out the communication on that, the invitation to members to do that on Christmas Day 1 year, and it's the kind of thing people obviously love to talk about their dinner table at the Christmas dinner with their families, and that's certainly. And by the way, we had people from all sorts of religious backgrounds. We had Muslims who wanted to meet the Pope, right? So it was something that was appreciated by all members. But that was definitely a unique experience. We got a lot of positive feedback on that. Um, we had tickets to go on some of the first private missions to the International Space Station, which involved multiple months of astronaut training at NASA's Kennedy Space Facility.
Wow.
And that is that is an 8-figure itinerary, tens of millions of dollars in order to do that. So it's a very small sort of target market for an experience like that. But that was a very unique experience that we had. Other ones, there are all sorts of animal-based ones. Snorkeling with orca and humpback whales in Norwegian fjords. You might have seen there's a BBC, documentary with David Attenborough, the Planet Earth crew, and there's an episode of that where they're in Norwegian fjords and you see these orca coming up from the black water all around the cameraman while he's in the water. We were actually there. We had the same boat as the BBC Planet Earth camera crew for our members when they were doing that experience. So a lot of animal-based experiences, Himalayan trekking to see snow leopards, things like that. Snorkeling with sperm whales in the Dominican Republic, all sorts of amazing sort of animal-based trips, which I've still got my bucket list of experiences. And all these trips are on there for eventually one day, if I ever decide to retire, I'll take some time off and go and do them. But yeah, a lot of nature-based, unique experiences. And then, things like meeting the Pope, private meet and greets with Taylor Swift, things like that, which were, very popular, particularly as gifts, right? That's a great gift to give someone if they're a Taylor Swift fan.
Wow. Okay, before we get back to the more business topics, how did that impact your lifestyle? Being surrounded by all these kind of experiences and having all these ideas, you could end up with, a bucket list of 1,000 crazy, amazing things to do. So I'm curious, how did that impact your lifestyle? Maybe second, also your network. Was that a good way to also meet a lot of high net worth individuals?
Yeah. So in terms of impacting my lifestyle, unfortunately, it didn't impact my lifestyle at all.
No time.
So, I think that was one of the tough things at working at Velocity Black. Even if you're the founder, or you're someone on the front line, helping serve clients, or you're an engineer, you are constantly seeing people do some of the most amazing things in the world. And there's a lot of FOMO. Imagine Instagram on steroids, right? It's like you're seeing that every day, and it's your work to help those people, and you can't take part, right? And don't get me wrong, we did have some events and stuff where occasionally some of the team would go to those events, and in fact, my travel team, I never actually went on a sort of, a free comped trip from any travel supplier, but our travel team did to get to go on some of these trips, which were comped by our travel suppliers. So from a lifestyle perspective, unfortunately, it had no impact whatsoever, apart from giving me inspiration for future trips. And
Long bucket list, very, very long bucket list.
And now, hopefully, I do have the resources to do all of those things. It's just a question of finding the time. So lifestyle, no difference. Network, absolutely. I built certainly one of, I think, the most powerful networks out of anyone I know who certainly runs a startup, both on the client side in terms of, our clients were world leaders, people guarded by Secret Service, through to, the world's, biggest singers, actors, musicians, athletes, as well as a lot of entrepreneurs. It was a very popular product with founders and successful entrepreneurs. So it certainly helped build my network with other startup founders and the venture community. And also on the supply side, I know a lot of, the top hotel chains in the world, a lot of these top experience providers. I'm still like the unofficial guy who all my friends like message me asking for recommendations, right? So certainly on that side, it helped me build a great network as well. But yeah, it was invaluable from that perspective. But there are two sides to that, right? Which is your clients are the most demanding people and successful people in the world. And as the co-founder, particularly when things go wrong, right, the ultimate escalation point was me. And so a lot of those people have my phone number, right? And I was at their beck and call 24/7, 365 for 8.5 years. So yeah, it was, it was definitely a very useful journey in terms of building out a network. But there is the dark side of that, which is these people are your clients, and you're running a business which is nonstop. We're particularly active at unsociable times, right? So, the time like weekends, evenings, holidays, times when people are traveling. those are our go times, right? So,
Okay.
that there were a lot of cancelled holidays, or me not going on any holidays for a long time. A lot of sacrifices that my family and friends made during that journey. But yeah, look, in the end, it paid off.
Incredibly fascinating. Okay, so going back to one of the fastest growing companies in Europe, what were some of the main drivers of your growth? Because I come mostly from a B2B, a B2C world, and I think probably many of the listeners do as well, where you acquire customers through Google ads, Facebook ads. I don't think that was your growth strategy.
No, we were building a premium brand, and if you're building a premium brand, it's very hard on the one hand to say, hey, look, we're an invitation only private members community for the world's most successful people. And at the same time, you then see an advert on Facebook for that product. It doesn't quite work, right? So,
Exactly.
a lot of what we did was brand building initially, and I'll give a lot of credit to my co-founder Zia for this, because we made some very big bets when we launched Velocity Black from a marketing perspective, which paid off but were risky at the time. And really, that was about aligning our brand with some of the most successful people in the world. We did, I guess, what would today be called influencer marketing before it was really a thing.
Hmm.
We had we had a lot of famous people from the worlds of music, sport, entertainment, who were, effectively brand ambassadors, who were our initial founding members. And that helped. We had a lot of events during our first year, like high profile events at things like we did the Oscars after party. We hosted the Oscars after party. We hosted like Coachella parties. We hosted events at some of the world's biggest sporting events. And that, combined with the sort of members, influencers that we had on board on the product, generated a huge amount of press, which created, a brand halo, and also generated a lot of applications. So initially, it was very much event driven for acquiring members, which sounds strange for a technology company. And
Mm.
you think, oh, how can you scale that? Well, you
Yeah.
can do a lot of events, but also when each member is paying thousands of pounds for a membership, and they're also spending a lot more once they become a member, you actually don't need that many members to build a very good business. So we start off with that event driven strategy. And then once we had, the events and PR working in our favor, really it was about converting those existing members into people who would be advocates of the product and refer other members. So referrals
Hmm.
was like the biggest channel in the end for us. We had members referring other members. And I'd say those are the three primary ways that we initially signed up members. We did try some other things over the years. We did partnerships, with various other luxury brands to kind of try and cross pollinate customers, but those things are really hard to execute well, in my opinion. Um, and then, yeah, obviously, this is all the Velocity Black side. On the enterprise side, it was much more, traditional enterprise sales, right? Where we had,
Hmm.
an enterprise sales team who were going out and engaging with the right corporates, explaining our product and value proposition. But yeah, initially it was making some big bets on influencers, events, press, and then it was like when you had that initial membership base, it was really making sure they loved the product and investing in the product to
Hmm.
the point where they were real advocates for it, and then driving referrals through that existing membership base.
Hmm. Hmm. Makes sense. Interesting. Um, Sam Altman said that it's easier to start a hard, I think I'm paraphrasing here, but I think he said it's easier to start a hard company than it is to start an easy company because there's less competition, because everyone wants to start a easy company. Very few people want to start the hard company. I would say, I mean, just the scale and impact and the things that you're telling me right now of Velocity, where I would definitely qualify that as a hard company. Do you agree with Sam on that statement?
And in some ways, I'm gonna slightly change what Sam said, but you know, I would say it definitely was a hard company, particularly operationally. If you imagine all the different types of services we did, just within dining, there's lots of different type of dining reservations. Just within travel, there's tons of subcategories and subcategories of subcategories. Same with experiences, same with luxury goods, and to do all those things really well, consistently in a product with thousands of suppliers around the world 24/7, 365 is one of the most operationally intense things I think that any startup can do. So I would agree with you that it was hard. Um, and we didn't feel like we had any direct competition. So there were these analog companies like Quintessentially is one, Ten Group is another, listed in the UK, who were doing things primarily through phone and email, who weren't really harnessing technology to execute what we were. So, we didn't feel like they were direct competitors for what we were doing. So in some ways, once you get past that initial hurdle of launching a product and having the customer base who love the product, I would agree it's easier in some ways, but those initial hurdles are really hard to overcome. To put it another way, and it's similar, is I used to get a lot of people saying, "Oh, this is like a niche product, right? Like it's a niche. You're going after a small number of people," and a lot of VCs found it very hard to understand, right? Like they couldn't. It's very hard for people to wrap their heads around what you can build like a really good business with 100,000 customers as a consumer business. You can do that, and the answer is yes, because each of those consumers is really like an enterprise contract of a startup, a normal startup, right? When you have the lifetime value well in excess of $50,000-$60,000 for each of these customers, it starts to look much more like a B2B or an enterprise business. But initially, people think it's a niche. It's small. Amex Centurion have around 100,000 customers globally, and so that's kind of the thing that people would typically compare it to and think, oh, I can only get to 100,000 customers. It's not very interesting. But when you look at the spending of those 100,000 customers, it starts to become very interesting, right? It's like 0.4% of the world's population control 40% of the world's spending power, right? So there is a huge market there from a dollar perspective. And so whilst it looks like a niche initially, from my perspective, I think that's much easier, right? Because with each customer that you get on board, there's a much larger contract value, obviously, with each of those customers, and it's you can justify a much higher acquisition cost, obviously, to get them on board. So from my perspective, I saw a lot of the Americans would say riches in the niches, but I really believe in that. Peter Thiel thinks the same thing, right? Start off in what many people consider to be a niche, therefore it's ignored. Therefore, maybe in the long run it's easier, like Sam might say, because there is no competition. And dominate that niche, and then use it to expand into adjacent categories, right, which might not be considered niche. But yeah, from my perspective, you can grow focused on like a small number of very high value customers at the top of any market that you're focused on is a great way to start your business. And you can always move down market. Right? You can always go to the mass market at some point. It's very hard to do it the other way around, right? Like Uber started with the Uber Lux cars, right? And then they moved down market. It would have been very hard for them to start with Uber X product and move up market because the people at the top of the market would have not viewed the brand in the same way.
Yeah.
So from a go-to-market perspective, you can grow quite efficiently and you can have quite a big impact in terms of your revenue if you're focused on that top part of the market and on obviously the channels and everything that you need to acquire customers in that top part of the market. And look, you can always expand our market later on. It's very hard to do it the other way around. So long answer to your question. I certainly agree with what Sam said, but there's the other way of looking at it is like focusing on a niche, dominating that niche, becoming effectively a monopoly in that niche, and then using that power to move into other adjacent niches.
So speaking of the numbers that you were mentioning, in the end, what does it take? So what did it take to right? So the news reported that the company was sold for 300 or just below $300 million. And okay, well, I'm not sure if that was ever confirmed by you, but we'll assume that that number is roughly correct. And what does, or at least it was a high value company one way or the other. What kind of numbers and other aspects of the business does it require to reach that kind of valuation, right? Because if we talk about hundreds of millions of dollars, I think that's probably safe to say that makes it one of the, I don't know, top 100 exits in the UK, maybe. So that's a pretty significant achievement, right?
Yeah, look, I haven't I haven't gone and looked at where we rank in terms of exits in the UK. Look, I
But it's
mean,
high.
yeah, look, but I tell you what, I don't necessarily look at things through the lens of the absolute number, right? And
Mhm.
if I were to do that, there's a lot of unicorns out there, or decacorns even, that have raised a lot of money, in some cases more than their valuation, right?
Yeah.
Now, would you still consider those companies to be successful? I don't know. From my perspective, one way to really assess like the success of the company is, what was the multiple on investor capital that they return to their investors, right? That's like a real, I think that's quite a clean measure of success. And in what time frame did they do that, right? Effectively, you get back to IRR from an investor perspective. And we our last round was, well, what can I say? I mean, I can't comment on the sale price, but I mean, I can say that the sale price was a significant multiple of the last valuation that we raised equity at. And we
Mhm.
raised some debt as well along the journey as part of that 40 million. So it wasn't all equity, but we returned, good returns for our investors, which I'm very proud of, and for our team. Importantly, our team, every single person in the team had equity in the business, and some of them very significant amounts where if they wanted to, they wouldn't have to work again. So yeah, that's what I'm proud of, and that's how I think I would assess our success, rather than looking at an absolute price that might be
Mhm.
reported in the press, and how that compares to other absolute prices. Because there are some companies that have sold for a lot more than what we were sold for, but they also raised a lot more, and their investors and sometimes their team didn't actually make any money, right? Because of liquidation
Mhm. Yeah.
preferences
Yeah.
and how the equity sort of waterfall down. So um, that's how I'd say, that's how I sort of judge our success. And the one thing I'm proud of is, we built a proper business which had good
Mhm.
unit economics, was generating significant positive cash flow, right, in the last few years, and provided a great return for investors and for our team. Those are the things which, I'll certainly look back on and say I'm very proud of from a numbers perspective anyway.
Mhm. Okay, and then SQL. So SQL is your new thing that you started 2 years ago or so, roughly.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, we really got going last year, but yeah, been working on it for a while. I guess the genesis of that was where I've done a lot of angel investing for the past 10 years. Always been
mhm.
investing in interested in investing in early stage companies, particularly in the UK and US, and was fascinated around how to get access to the best deals, right? And as a founder, as you'll know, or even as someone who owns a media organization, as you'll know, that a founder has a particular advantage as an operator in being able to access interesting deals as an angel investor. But beyond being a founder, one thing I noticed was a growing trend of people who could bring more than capital to a company in order to leverage, their reputation, their brand, in order to get access to invest in businesses, particularly people in sports and entertainment. There's a real growing trend in the US around, athletes or people in music or film, leveraging, their brand, their followers, to get access to invest in very interesting companies. And then obviously using their marketing power and, PR to accelerate those companies, right, post investment. And there are very few asset classes. If you think you're a professional athlete, for example, there are very few asset classes you can invest in where you can have a direct impact on the outcome, right? Like if you're investing in property and real estate, or in the stock market, you can only do so much to really have an impact on the outcome of that investment. But with early stage venture and with startups, you can have a dramatic impact on their ability to drive sales and create distribution for them, and ultimately, help propel them towards much higher valuations. So I thought it was an interesting angle to look at. So we started SQL really, I mean, we started our private beta last summer. And it's an investment platform. So it's invite only for professional athletes and ex professional athletes. We help them learn about investing. So we have a lot of educational content, interviews with successful founders, investors, VCs. So we help them learn about investing and entrepreneurship. And then we have deal drops on the product. So we invest small tickets in companies which fit our criteria, and they can co-invest with us, and we create SPVs for each deal we do.
Mhm.
Typically, positive impact companies. So we're investing in things like climate tech, healthcare, education, areas which we think are going to have a positive impact on society. Which for our members, for our clients, athletes, financial returns is one of their considerations. They're also thinking about their reputation. A lot of them are trying to build their reputation outside of sport. They want to, be seen as smart business people and smart investors, as many of them are. And so we're helping them do that. So it's initially just focused on direct startup investing, but we plan to expand into other asset classes in the future. But still
Mm.
very small. It's really exciting to start a company for the second time. Team is just over 10 full-time people in the team at the moment, mostly product and engineering. And we're still at that start of the journey. We yet to do our official public launch, which we'll be doing in a couple of months, both here and in the US. But yeah, in many ways, quite similar to Velocity Black in terms of certainly the business model. We charge a membership fee, then we also have carry on some of the investments through the platform. And the type of clients we're dealing with, again, I've gone, I seem to enjoy sort of punishing myself, but, our clients are some of the most successful people in the world, again, and rightfully very demanding. So from those aspects, it's quite similar to what we're doing at Velocity Black, but obviously completely different product in terms of, the assets, class and stuff we're focused on. But yeah, very exciting. I think in the long run, we will move beyond direct startup investing. We'll be adding funds as another asset class very soon. And then we'll look beyond sort of VC and venture into, other more traditional asset classes in the long run. But yeah, it's fun, working with, again, very successful athletes, very driven, who've had really successful careers. We're talking about the best athletes in the world, Super Bowl winners, world boxing champions, Champions League winners. And so speaking to those athletes regularly and getting their feedback and understanding how we can help them build their legacy right beyond sport is a very exciting, challenge to be working on every day.
I mean, my first question here again is, how do you even reach those kind of people?
So it's very, very similar to the Velocity Black playbook in many ways. Obviously, I had a lot of good connections from Velocity Black in professional
Mm.
sport. A couple of the people that I have with me in the business, one is Matt Smith, who is a friend from university, and he's had a good career as a professional footballer. Played, for Fulham, QPR, a number of football clubs. He's now coming towards the end of his career, but he has a great network in sport, and I'm hoping when he does call time in his career, which may be soon, he'll be joining us full time. But he's certainly
Mm.
helped us build our initial athlete base. We also have I have some great contacts in the US in various sports, which have been helpful building our initial community. And once you build your initial community, and we're coming out of that private beta soon. But the product, is great. I genuinely believe we've created the best investment experience anywhere. I think it's much easier and smoother than AngelList or any of these other private investment platforms, which it has to be given the kind of clients we have. Once you build a product people love and you have great initial membership base on there, they will refer and bring other people onto the platform.
Mm. Mm.
We will obviously do some press. We are going to be doing events. So some of those similar strategies that we used initially at Velocity Black when we publicly launched, you will hear a lot more about us this year. We're going to be a lot louder. So yeah, when that press goes out, we've got some what are undoubtedly some of the greatest athletes of all time investing in us as a business, right? And I think when we announced that, as well as our initial, we've made 3 investments so far. Our 4th one's about to complete next week. We announced that initial cohort of investments we've made, and some of the people backing us, I think we'll really be on a very upwards trajectory in terms of growth, and we'll be going at full speed at that point. At the moment, we're still in what I'm calling this private beta, while we test things, get relevant approvals from a regulatory perspective, particularly to launch fully in the US. In a couple of months' time, we'll be ready to go full speed. But yeah, a lot of it's existing network, getting the right people into the business, and then using press and events to really drive growth in membership base and referrals, obviously, once we're fully launched.
Amazing. So obviously, yeah, there are a lot of similarities with Velocity, and you're taking a lot of lessons from Velocity now to SQL. What are some things that you're doing differently now? So obviously, you said Velocity was what is like an eight years journey, right? A lot of you did a
Yeah,
lot of
nine
things right,
years.
but also a lot of mistakes. What are you approaching completely differently this time?
So certainly, I mentioned earlier that the first couple of years, we weren't really focused on culture and hiring at Velocity, and that is, I spend the majority of my time now hiring and
Mm-hmm,
on culture
mm-hmm,
and answering those questions. And second comes conversations with customers at the moment. So I'm really investing very heavily in that. I believe, if I could write one book, it would be on hiring. I have a lot of thoughts, and I have actually a playbook which I send to every founder that I invest in personally on hiring. And so that is something that we're investing very heavily in, building the right culture, being deliberate about it. I have a very scientific hiring process. It does take a long time, but we get great results out of it. And we hire people who are not only world class, but who will stay with the company for what I hope will be the next decade. So that is something that we are certainly doing differently from the start at SQL. Um, there are some, there are some obviously advantages of having the exit right from
mm-hmm,
a capital perspective. I'm in a group of exited founders, and there are 1,000 exited founders in this group, and so it's one of the most valuable communities I'm a member of. And there typically is two approaches after someone has their first exit, right, when they're starting their second company. One approach is, oh no, you should keep all your money from your exit and you should go out and raise from other people because you've got the reputation to go and do that, right?
mm-hmm.
And that is the most popular route that I think people take from a capital perspective when they think about their second business. The other approach is what I call like the Elon Musk approach, which is, you know, I'm putting all my money from PayPal into Tesla and SpaceX, right, to the dime almost. I'm putting all my money in, right, and I'm fully in on what I'm doing next. I'm certainly more towards the Elon end of the spectrum than
Mm-hmm.
the other end, and I really believe in what we're doing at SQL. I did raise some money from some very close friends and family, and the main reason for that was to hold me accountable, right, to make sure I
Mhm,
had
mhm,
some people to report to still, and keep me on track. Let me put it that way. But I plan to certainly provide the majority of the capital for the company going forward. We're taking some strategic money from some of these very high profile athletes onto the cap table because
mhm,
I think that will help us accelerate on our mission. But beyond that, certainly for the first 5 years of the company, I imagine it will be the vast majority of the capital will come from me to fund the
mhm.
business. So that's something I'm doing differently to Velocity Black. And I wasn't in a position to do that when I started Velocity Black. But yeah, that's like one of the key questions a lot of founders ask themselves when they're going on their second mission. And by the way, I'm not
Yeah.
saying one route is better than the other, but yeah, certainly the right route for me. I really believe in what we're doing. I don't want to be diluted. I don't want to lose control over what we're doing. I don't want to be ceding control to large institutional investors. Certainly at this stage, we did have a number of offers for investment from large institutional investors, but it's not right for us given our plans. So yeah, that is one other thing that I'm doing differently.
Hiring. You have to talk a little bit more about hiring because you gave a pretty strong teaser before that's your strong point. So can you, obviously we probably don't have time to go through your whole blueprint or your whole document that you have, but how much more can you share about that?
Um, Yeah, look, okay. So, I mean, look, firstly, before you think about the hiring process, which, by the way, hiring process is the most important process in your company, more important than anything else, more important than fundraising, it's more important than selling. Get that right, and everything else follows. Um, but before you start thinking about designing the hiring process, one thing to think about is designing a purposeful culture. And what I mean by that is, having behaviors. What is a culture, right? People hear the word culture and they kind of, a lot of founders kind of switch off a bit and they think it's like this fuzzy HR word, right? And it's like not relevant to them. Well, culture is really just behaviors that you're trying to incentivizing your team, like in trying to hire for in your team, and um, they should be relatively controversial, right? A culture is not integrity and honesty, right? No one's trying to hire dishonest people, right? No one's, there's the famous image of the CEO of Enron getting led away in handcuffs by the FBI and the Enron sign, and they've got their values on the wall, like honesty,
Yeah.
integrity, or whatever behind it.
Yeah.
Like, that's really just corporate nonsense. The values and behaviors we're looking for are things that should be controversial. They should be something which are applicable to your company that wouldn't be applicable to another company. And the
Mhm.
reason you want that to be controversial is because you want people to fit in well with how you work as a founder and how you imagine the business working. And you kind of want to ward off people who it won't work for,
Mhm.
right? And people self-select out of the hiring process when they see your values, right? We put them up on our website. People can see them straight away. People know, like two like good examples would be Facebook in the early years, move fast and break things, right? That's
Mhm.
their, like, what kind of engineer you are if that's the kind of place you want to go and work. Whereas Apple might be at the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Apple might
Mhm.
be, move slowly and get things perfect because we're a hardware
Mhm.
business. We have high average sales cost and we can't afford to screw up this shipment of 100 million iPhones, right? We can't recall them,
Mhm.
right? So that would be like one example. Or another example might be Elon very famously, sleeping in his factory. Right now,
Mhm.
you know, you're not going to work at Tesla or SpaceX looking for work-life balance, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
just very clear, right? So people self-select out, and so therefore, the people that do go and work there, by the way, will probably stay there quite a long time. Will be happy in their work and will get a lot of value out of their work. So first step is build a deliberate culture, and it should be something which is relatively unique and hopefully fits in with how you work as a founder, because you have to live that culture, right? You can't just put it on the wall and forget about it. People should call you out on it as well if you're not living up to those values. But build that deliberate set of controversial cultural values, which will be part of how you assess people during a hiring process.
Mhm.
So that's the first step. I don't know how much more time we have, but I could speak for a good 10 hours about this. Um, like next step, right? Next step, building the hiring process. A lot of founders make this mistake of focusing initially too much time on the assessment phase, right? Like it's like, oh, we've got some candidates, we need to assess them. Really, what you want to do first is build a very strong top of funnel, right? You need, like, if you've only got 20 people applying for your job, or the average, according to Workable in Europe for tech jobs, is 34 applicants per role. At SQL, we have more than 1,000 applicants per role
Wow.
that we've listed on our website. And that's, it's not by accident or chance. It's very deliberate in terms of how we built our top of funnel for our hiring process. We've invested in our employer brand on LinkedIn and on our own website. We've put a lot of information out there about how we work and who we are, and some of the people backing us and our backgrounds as exited founders, etc. And when we post a job, we post it to as many job boards and sites as are available, and you create a very strong big top of funnel. That's the first step, and you should really focus on that before you focus on designing the perfect assessment. Because if you only got 30 applicants in your funnel,
Mhm.
you can have the most perfect assessment in the world, you're still going to get a lower quality outcome or you're much more likely to have a lower quality outcome than I will with 1,000 candidates in my funnel
Mhm.
and an inferior assessment process. So focus on top of funnel first. Secondly, obviously the assessment process. I believe in standardized testing, and I believe in it for all roles, however senior. And some people get offended by that, but and by a standardized test, I mean cognitive ability. I mean personality tests. There are certain things I look for in personality tests, which I'm not going to reveal here publicly, but are good signifiers of career success.
Mhm.
And it's not perfect. Some of these tests do have biases built into them, but they are infinitely more reliable than human interviews. Okay, now we still do some human interviews, but they come later. So our first step is we do a screening call. We give something to the candidate. We tell them about what we're doing. Then we send them some standardized tests. And some of those might be role specific. Obviously, for engineers, there are certain coding tests and stuff we'd have them do. Um, and then there might be, a task or a case study, dependent again on the role. And the reason you give that is because standardized tests, you can only get 100 out of 100, let's say, whereas with a task you can have a much bigger dispersion of like quality of results that you get back, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you have a much better idea about the quality of a candidate if you give them a task as well as the standardized tests. But yeah, those standardized tests and some of the things I look for in those standardized tests and the personality test together are very, very strong predictors of career success in people. And you have to adapt some of those things to how you work as a company. But broadly, that's the first step. And then human interviews kind of are a second step. And really, at this stage, we almost, certainly from a surface point of view, would offer most people who get to the interview stage a job, right? So
Mm-hmm.
someone gets an interview stage with us, they are likely to be getting a job offer, because the interview stage for us, we're really looking for a reason not to hire someone, and we're testing on those cultural aspects that we've defined, right, as part of
Mm-hmm.
building our culture. So that's, and you have to train people well to interview. People don't know how to interview well. They have biases. Everyone have biases. I have
Mm-hmm.
biases. You have biases. You might hear a particular accent or something from your childhood, and your brain will be doing something to either be preferable towards that candidate or
Mm-hmm.
not. So you have to try and train people to be um, to kind of filter that stuff out. And actually, there's technology. Screen Loop is a great startup actually that has technology to kind of help people filter that out in the interview process. Um, and then lastly, and I'd say almost most importantly, is referencing. You
Uh-huh.
know, if you told me I could only use one of three of standardized testing, interviews, and referencing to hire someone, I would probably just choose referencing.
Uh-huh.
So referencing done well, and particularly blind referencing, um, is a very
What is
strong
blind
way of.
referencing?
Well, you're reaching out to people they would have worked with in the past, but not people that they've given you, right?
Yeah.
You're looking for
Mm-hmm.
people at a similar level or above them or below them, but certainly people who worked directly with them in the past and asking questions. There's a very good interview with the founder of Fair on Harry Stebbings' podcast on 20VC, where he talks about his referencing techniques, which I'd highly recommend people listen to. But if you asked like open questions like would you recommend working with this person, almost no one's going to say no, right? So you've got to kind of force out, and people don't want to admit to other people's weaknesses as well. So how do you get them to admit to their weaknesses in a reference? Well, you give them 3 or 4 characteristics and you say, can you rank these 4 characteristics from strongest to weakest for this person, right? So you're
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
triangulating by asking questions in a way like that. And yeah, and then the reference, will give you a very strong indicator about whether that person will be a success in your team. So yeah, those are the 3 core parts: standardized testing, interviews, and the referencing. There's a lot of detail behind what I just said, and it forms a
Yeah.
multi-thousand word email that I write to founders. But it's together, if you do all those 3 things and you take your time with the process, a lot of I've just had a VP of operations join me, who's very experienced and had, been at one UK neobank from early stage through to unicorn, another Series B stage fintech raised tens of millions of dollars. So she'd had a lot of operating experience. And her comment to me the other day was that we leave the window very open for each role that we're hiring for, and it takes a long time. It's like, and I'm like, yeah, because you want to fill the funnel with people, right? Like if you have people
Mm-hmm.
applying for 2 weeks and then you start interviewing people, you don't wait, let's say, a month to get a really strong candidate pool in there. And obviously you've got to manage people during that time frame. You're going to miss out on making a good hire. So we take time in our hiring process, which obviously there is an opportunity cost to that. And the main opportunity cost is that me and other existing members of the team are having to do far too much, right? Still,
Mm-hmm.
and we're the blockages for various important projects that need to happen. But in the long run, you'll be much better off, and you have a very strong team who will be happy at the company, who will stay a long time, and who will drive great results for you. So there's the obvious refrain of hire slow, fire fast. I'm very happy that we haven't let anyone go at SQL since we started, and no one has left either. No one has resigned, and I hope that continues long into the future. And but you can only have that kind of level of employee satisfaction and retention if you invest more time upfront in creating a very solid hiring process. Um,
Mm.
so so yeah, that's the condensed version.
We're gonna be waiting for that book, Alex, because this is this is
Yeah,
some amazing stuff.
give me another 10 years. I've got something else I'm working on now, but I'll
we need, we need that sooner. No, but it makes so much sense because yes, I mean at the end of the day, the company are the people, right? And who they are and how they work. I know that, and this is a very different approach to hiring than what most company do, and definitely different than what I've done in the past and than what we're doing now. And I know that I'll change a few things based on what you just told me. And yeah, in the meantime, we'll wait for that book to come out. Um, Speaking of culture and people, there's one final part that I always like to talk about, which is just performance, right? Personal performance, performance of you as a founder and your team. Um, how maybe the first question is a bit more general. How would you define performance, or what's important about performance to you for somebody to do their very best at their job?
That's a good question. I mean, I live by this phrase that happiness equals reality minus expectations, right?
Yeah,
This equation, let me say, not a phrase, an
I
equation,
say that often. I say that to my
and
wife very often. No expectations. If you want to be happy, just no expectations.
yeah, well, look, that's the reason a lot of founders, are not necessarily happy on their journeys because they have really high expectations, right? And typically, founders are optimists, and they have to be,
Mm-hmm.
because if they knew it's like if you knew everything that it would take. The founder of NVIDIA recently said this, right, in an interview. I think it was with Sam Altman, actually. He said, he was asked, if you knew everything you knew today, would you go back, and you go back 10 years, would you start NVIDIA? He said, no, of course not. You'd be crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I just heard the
and
same thing from a friend who started a company that did over 150 million in revenue last year, and he said, "If I knew what it will take, there's no way I would ever start that."
yeah, exactly. So, founders are typically optimists, and therefore they have high expectations. They set high standards for themselves, for their teams. And so rarely are they really meeting those, where it is reality
Mm,
meeting those expectations. And so typically they can be quite unhappy on the journey, right?
yeah.
They have to find satisfaction in some of those small wins along the journey, but typically they can be unhappy. So, um, you know, going back to your question around performance, I think a lot of it is about aligning expectations between you and your team around, what is performance, right? And setting targets and having and behaviors, right? Again, those cultural behaviors for me are as important, if not more important, than any particular targets or KPIs that people may have in the team. But making sure that that's clearly communicated and people understand what those are is a good way of, I think, of ensuring that people have an opportunity at least to perform. Right? If no one knows
Mm,
what they're working towards, they're not quite sure where the expectations are. They really, you're not giving them a fighting chance to deliver something and to make you happy, right? So I think that's the first part of it. Um, and and aside from that, you kind of got to move things out of the way of your team, right? What are the typical concerns that people might have in the team? What are the worries and stresses or things that are taking up their time, which may make it harder for them to deliver at work? Depending on the experience of your team or the age of your team, those may be very different things. If you have a young team, it may be that they don't have necessarily good mentors or role models around them, and they're not sure of their path. If you have a very experienced team, it may be things like having a very generous parental policy, right?
mm,
And making sure that they are able to focus when they're at work, because you provide some assistance with, for example, we provide night nannies for anyone who's a SQL employee
oh,
decides to return. We have a very generous sort of parental leave for both mothers and fathers, or primary and secondary caregivers. But beyond that parental leave, if someone does decide to come back early, we provide, we fund a night nurse for them so that they can sleep well at night and come in fresh
yeah,
and in the
yeah.
morning. So depending on like the type of team you have, how experienced they are, their age, I want everyone to be healthy. We provide, we cover the majority of people's, gym memberships, things like that. We try and encourage people to eat healthily. We don't have lots of unhealthy snacks and, alcohol sort of sitting around the office all the time. Making sure that people are exercising well and eating well and sleeping well. Like, if you can find ways to do that without obviously being too overbearing and interfering in your team's lives, I think you're putting them in a great place to be able to succeed at work and perform well, right? So those are other things that I think a lot of founders don't necessarily think about, because they think it's not their role to think about that stuff. But
Mhm.
personally, the times where I perform best are when I've been sleeping well, when I've been exercising every day, and when I'm eating well and not drinking too much, right? Those are the
Yeah.
times where I get the most out of myself. And I think, I think I struggle to see any team member would have a real issue with you trying to at least give them the resources to achieve that, right? So that's another thing to think about in terms of performance.
I love that. Have those conversations also with my team quite often, or with some members of my team. And is that how you think about your personal performance as well? So obviously, I think the things that you just mentioned, I always talk about them as the fundamentals, right? You have to sleep, you have to have good nutrition, you have to, yeah, not drink or not drink too much, right? You have to work out as well. I think that that's another one that's often
Mm.
dismissed. Um, is that, yeah? Are those the things, or is there anything extra that you do or think about in your own personal performance? And I think one aspect, maybe I'll add another thing. You've talked before about working and working really hard, and I found this quote which you wrote on your blog post, which I thought was really nice, so I'm going to read it out. You wrote, "My mom taught me by example that while I may not be able to outsmart everyone, I can outwork anyone."
Mm.
And I think that's a pretty powerful quote. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. And I do see hard work as part of performance as well, right? At the end of the day, I think if you
Yeah.
are able to put in more hours, you're very likely going to get more output as well. As controversial as that is recently to say.
Yeah, look, it's strange that it's controversial. And by the way, the two things that I'm saying, they may seem diametrically opposed initially, but I'll explain why they're not.
Mm,
You can eat and sleep well and work out, and at the same time, it can be true that you need to put in a lot of hours to be successful, right? I mean, you can do both those things. You can put in a lot of hours at work. You can still eat well. You can still sleep well. You can still go to the gym. It's a question of prioritizing. And it does mean you have to make sacrifices in your life. It does mean you're not going to be socializing as much with your friends. It may mean that you're not seeing your family as much. And I wouldn't say that anyone should do that for like, decades at a time, but there are times in your career where you need to focus. And there was certainly, times during the Velocity Black journey where there was like a 3 or 4 year period, which was like go time, where it was just incredibly intense. And I switched off everything else in my life and focused maniacally on the business. Right. And I think whether someone's a founder or whether they're a startup employee or, or they're an investor, even, I think certain periods in everyone's career where they should do that if they want to, really be at the top of their game and compete, because, business is a competitive sport. Um, and so, yeah, like the whole, I say, the people who preach about, work life balance, typically they fall into two categories, right? Either they've already made it, right, and so they don't need to be working really long hours and putting in that time, or they're never going to make it. Right? They're one of those two categories, right? I think for anyone to be successful, hard work, really successful rather than lucky, hard work is a
mm,
requirement, and you need to put in hours. But you can still do that and work out. You can still do that and eat well. You can still do that and sleep well, right? Those things are not mutually exclusive. But yeah, look, I'd certainly agree. And I don't think, it may be unpopular to say, particularly the work-life balance. I don't believe in work-life balance, right? I believe,
mm,
people need to prioritize whatever's important to them in their lives. And at certain points in their lives, it's going to be their career. At certain points, it's going to be their family. At certain points, it's going to be other things. It might be their personal health or other challenges that they're having, right? But yeah, there's never like a perfect equilibrium, right? You're always making sacrifices in order to make big gains in a certain part of your life. And I think for most certainly for most founders, and certainly for every successful founder, I think there has to be a time where you're making sacrifices in the rest of your life to really focus on work and your career.
What about focus? I feel like you might have an interesting opinion about focus as well. I haven't really seen you talk about that, but there's focus on a big picture level, but then there's also a focus on just day to day, hour to hour kind of level, right? So one is, I suppose, one is more around notifications and interruptions, and do you take time to just do focused work, while the other is more like how many maybe other projects you have in your life. And I'm curious how you think about that. So you've obviously, for a long time, I guess velocity was your main thing, but I also did a fair amount of angel investing, which can also take, I think, quite a bit of time, and especially mental capacity, I would say, reviewing all those pitches and providing
Yeah,
feedback and so
it
on and so
depends
forth.
how you do it, right? And
There you go.
my strategy has certainly developed over time, right? Like, and there's a lot of people that spend a lot of time assessing companies when they're angel investing, and my advice to people who are starting angel investing is actually to spend more time on getting access to good deals, and that
Hmm.
can be less
Hmm.
stressful and more enjoyable, and can fit in more with your work as a founder, because you're speaking to other investors and founders all the time, so it's easier to kind of fit in around your primary responsibilities. But yeah, look, focus is important. And look, there were times during the Velocity Black journey where I was doing no angel investing and I was maniacally focused on what we were doing, right? And then there were other times where I had some time to kind of be able to explore that passion. In terms of what I do now, it's easy. If resource and money is a constraining factor, it's easy after you have an exit for suddenly you have hundreds of opportunities in front of you, right? Like, okay, well, I could do lots more startup investing now. I mean, that's a good thing about Sequel, is that it combines my passion for startup investing as well as actually operating and building a tech company. But, you could do a lot of startup investing, or you could invest in, you could buy some, cash flowing businesses, or you could, or you could start a charity, which I'm also doing. So there are all sorts of opportunities as soon as money as a resource is no longer constrained. So you have to get good at saying no to things. That's definitely one thing I've learned in the past sort of 9 months or so since the exit. You do have to be good at saying no, and you have to be like quite brutal sometimes in saying no, to make sure you stay focused. For me, in terms of how I work, I describe myself as a bit like a lion, right? I'll go through these sort of sprints where I'm, in the office a couple of days for like 20 hours a day, or I'm getting in, like this morning, I actually woke up very early and I was in the office before 6 this morning. And, I like the early morning sort of 3 or 4 hours, particularly when I'm in the UK. If I'm in the US, it's slightly different, but 3 or 4 hours from sort of 5 till 9 o'clock, where I'm not getting phone calls and dozens of WhatsApps and notifications, are a great time for me to actually focus on strategically important initiatives and on being proactive and deliberate about what we're doing, right? Rather than being reactive to the latest, you know, demand from a member of the team or from a customer or from, an investor or partner. So I certainly get a lot of focus by working at times where other people might be sleeping, and so for other people that might be late at night. I find it very hard to work by the time it gets to late at night, but for me it's that early morning period, and that's how I find focus and time to make progress on important initiatives.
Got it. Okay, a few very quick questions for the end. Um, what's the number one book or course or person that had the biggest impact on your life?
Hmm. I'm not going to say the biggest impact, 'cause I'm pretty sure it's a book that someone else will have mentioned, and I don't want to be, another cliche, but I'm going to give one which probably no one else has mentioned, which is Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. Um,
Hmm.
he's a former sort of ad agency founder and exec. He started at Ogilvy. And I think the main lesson from that book is, kind of zigging while others are zagging, right? And if all the decisions you make as an entrepreneur or whatever you're doing in business are based on data and are based on logic and common sense, at best, you will mirror the performance of everyone else, right?
Yeah.
If you want to really make the biggest breakthroughs as a founder, as a company, or as a team member in a startup, you have to look beyond logic, and you have to, that there is some magic and some leaps of faith that have to be done, and you sometimes have to do the opposite of what is logical in order to make those big breakthroughs, right? And that's also where naivety can help founders a lot, right? Not knowing where the limits are, and what's possible and what's impossible. So that is a book that I highly recommend. Lots of really tangible examples in that book of illogical solutions which have led to huge business outcomes and certainly breakthroughs in science and technology. So highly recommend that book.
Nice. What are some powerful principles did you live by?
I try to demonstrate um, I try to demonstrate value as much as possible. Right? Like I like to add value to people, but
Mm-hmm.
demonstrating that and actually doing something and making connection and making an introduction and providing a resource and being upfront about that, I think, and paying it forward is pays infinite returns. And I do believe in karma, and I do believe if you're constantly doing those things and helping other people and positively impacting them, that pays you back 100 times over. So in
Mm-hmm.
many ways, you could see that as selfless. It's not. It's very selfish. Paying it forward is very selfish strategy because it ends up coming back to you 100 times over. So that's certainly something I try to live by as much as I can. And beyond that, as a principle, um, I really believe in equality of opportunity. I'm starting a charity, or I've started a charity under our family foundation. We're incubating it initially. Eventually, it will be spun out as a separate charity where we're helping people from lower income backgrounds or disadvantaged backgrounds, young entrepreneurs, start their own business. Right. So, vast majority of founders come from wealthy backgrounds or very well connected backgrounds, and so we're helping initially people in the UK who are on free school meals. So by definition, their parents together were on benefits, or they were earning combined less than £20,000 per year. We're helping them start their own businesses and start that entrepreneurial journey, because I believe that helping people start that journey is one of the best ways to help them help themselves and help their communities and bring whole families and communities out of poverty and into a good better place in life. So that's something else I believe in. Like I had a lot of you know I don't like the word privilege, but I'm going to use it. I had a lot of privilege in my starting position in life, and I came from a good background, and I was lucky enough to go to a nice school, and my parents, brought me up well, and I had both my parents, at home when I was young. And reflecting back on that, there's a lot of people, particularly in the UK and US, who actually are starting on at a very different starting position. So that's something else I really believe in, and helping more people get to that starting line where they have a real shot and opportunity to take some risk and go and build a business and swing the bats without being worried that they can't help their mum pay their electricity bill. That's the kind of that's the kind of way that I definitely like to help people in the future.
Amazing. Um, I'll say thank you for doing that, and thank you for coming on the podcast. I have one last thing to say for everyone who listened until the end. I have a mission this year. A year ago, we were in the top 15% most shared podcasts on Spotify, which was thanks to everyone who shared the episodes everywhere. I'm very convinced that this year we can get to the top 5%. So if you listen until the end, please either subscribe or leave a comment or share so that we spread the word, and then obviously I can get also more guests like Alex and like everyone else we've had before. So please support that. And yeah, Alex, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Matty. It was great to be here. Cheers.
Cheers.